Good morning, everybody. Happy Tuesday. Have an amazing show for everybody today. What do we have, Krystal?
Indeed, we do. Many interesting stories unfolding this week. We're going to take another look at DeepSeek, which has completely roiled the American stock market. What is going to happen next? We also had Trump weighing in what I found to be a rather amusing fashion. So we'll get to...
It's amusing no matter what.
Yeah. We'll get to all of that. Also, we're going to take a look at egg prices, which are spiking, and ask the question whether potential inflation across the board is on the menu and what sort of political problems this could pose for the Trump administration. There are a number of significant confirmation hearings that are happening this week among some of the, I guess, most controversial or most uncertain to pass confirmation nominees. We're talking about Tulsi Gabbard, RFK Jr., Kash Patel in particular, and a few Republicans very unhappy with the Labor Department pick because she had supported the PRO Act. So a lot to get into there about the various divisions within the Republican Party. We're also going to take a look at some of the things we've learned since those horrific wildfires in LA, including about the way that landlords responded with mass price gouging, which should be illegal, is actually technically illegal. Whether that's going to be enforced or not is another question. And how private equity roll-ups of fire engine companies, so the companies that make and sell fire trucks, how that really contributed to the lack of preparation and ability to fully respond to those wildfires in LA, which is truly a national story based on this national private equity roll-up. So we'll take a look at that. AOC is now trashing Joe Biden. Kind of interesting at this point. What does this say about the future of the Democratic Party and where things are heading? Charlemagne also weighing in on that. And Bill Gates trashing Elon Musk. Some billionaire versus billionaire violence. Always interesting to take a look at that one as well.
Yeah, it's always amusing. All right, let's get to, actually, before we get to that, thank you to everybody who's been signing up, premium subscribers. We are doing our AMA later today, so if you want to be able to participate in those, of course, breakingpoints.com, go ahead and sign up. But let's get to DeepSeek. DeepSeek has completely not only roiled the international stock market, it faces now big questions here for our own economy, our tech companies, some government spending, links to Stargate, to China. There are a lot of geopolitical implications, so it's absolutely fascinating what's happening. President Trump actually reacted to the release of DeepSeek yesterday when he was speaking to members of Congress. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
This is very unusual when you hear a DeepSeek, when you hear somebody come up with something. We always have the ideas. We're always first. So I would say that's a positive. That could be very much a positive development. So instead of spending billions and billions, you'll spend less and you'll come up with hopefully the same solution.
So there's some praise for DeepSeek from President Trump. He says, we always have the ideas, we're always first, and instead of billions, you spend less, and you're going to come up with, hopefully, the same solution. And in terms of DeepSeek, you guys did a good job yesterday of breaking it all down, but it really is fascinating. Effectively, what we have seen is the release of an equivalent technological model to the latest one from ChatGPT, except it was been able to do for far less the cost of computing, not only in its development, but in the overall inferences, as in that the cost per inference, as in every time that you put something in, its ability to spit out a roughly equivalent result is dramatically cheaper than where they are. Now, why did that cause the international stock market to react, and specifically Nvidia stock and all these big tech companies? It's because they spend, of course, billions and billions and hundreds of billions of dollars on their capital requirements to build these data centers, to train their models. Nvidia also, the reason that its stock has exploded is that it's extremely expensive chips, highly profitable to the company, have been the ones that have been bought en masse and are the major expenditure by these tech companies. So the idea being, if you can train a very sophisticated AI model for much less the cost with less sophisticated chips, then the profit margin of that company will go down. And Andrew Ross Sorkin over at CNBC had a reaction to this and kind of broke down both his surprise at the model and some of the implications. Let's take a listen.
Now, you can take a look right now at the AI-related stocks. So NVIDIA, ARM, AMD, Microsoft, Meta, interestingly, on that list, given its open source. We got to talk about the open source, closed source bit of this as well.
And then that's a shocker to see NVIDIA down by more than 12% right now.
Absolutely. And then you have global chip stocks also in the red across the board, ASML Holdings and others. There is the question, I will say, Alexander Wang made the point last week, and it's become sort of the question mark about all of this, which is, he suggested on our air that it is possible that they were using some of the highest performing Nvidia chips, perhaps as many as 50,000 of them, to build this model. Now, and they weren't supposed to have those chips.
Right.
If
So
that's
the case,
true,
not the size.
The dynamic is different. Yeah. If it's not true, then maybe all bets are off. It's possible, by the way, even if it is true, meaning even if they use those chips to create this, or at least partially to create this, it is still a significantly more efficient and better model. I think everybody agrees that right this moment, I mean, I don't know if did you get to play? It is mind-blowing.
It looks really great. I mean, it feels like it's open source, so people can test this out themselves.
But I can tell you all the tests that I do just to see whether I think the writing is better, whether I think that it can answer certain questions. Yeah. I mean, it was not only faster, it was more human. The reasoning is shocking. I mean, there were moments where I was like, oh my God, we are so much. You could feel the step change as a person. I will also say, as exciting as it was, there was an element where I became scared because I thought, I had the opportunity to talk to all these people last week, and they all said the future is here, and da-da-da-da. And then you sort of see it, and you go, oh, okay, I feel you, in a different sort of visceral way. So, yes, I think this is all happening at a level that when you mark your sort of AI history timeline in life, I think this past week, today, and everything else will be on it.
Super fascinating in terms of his insight. Also, he was just at Davos, of course, and he was speaking with all of these tech CEOs. So I think he in particular can place this. Not a surprise that this was released in the first week of the Trump administration. And I actually think it really gets to something that you and I hit on in our inaugural coverage. When the history of this period is written, it is very likely that AI and not many of the controversies that we spend our time talking about will be the most consequential and the most enduring for our overall economic life. Yeah. So the step change is here, and the step change and the ideas behind it are interesting. Now, as he said, I think there's some serious asterisks to put on DeepSeek. One is this idea that it was trained for quote unquote $6 million. Almost certainly not true from everything I've looked at. Oh, the idea also that it may not have been possible without all of the hundreds of billions, perhaps trillions spent by our tech companies because it was able to train itself off of that. But listen, you work smarter, not harder, right? And that's part of what you really have learned here. What does it mean for the future? I have no idea. And I think that's the open question mark here for government policy, for our own tech companies, and the fundamental question of the U.S. economy and our own consumers in this. Because like it or not, and this is a point that our friend Joe Weisenthal made, is that, look, America, the way that we do retirement is basically like Social Security is like, here's enough to eat, but we're all, 60, 70% of households, their overall retirement is stuck in the stock market. And even if you're not invested in Nvidia or whatever, you likely have overwhelming exposure to it through the S&P 500 or buying index funds. It's not just us, the entire Western world is caught up in this. And so it's just some fundamental questions too about if AI is to replace humanity. It's like, well, then the idea is humanity should have a stake in that. And if, we're going to lose that stake and it's all going to be rolled up and consolidated in China, massive question mark for America, for our future, our ability to retire. There's lots of things going on here.
So the Weisenthal quote you're referring to, which I think is a really important piece of this, is he says, I think a big macro fact about the American economy is we have a de facto social contract where financial assets are expected to go up over time. Assets going up is how we pay for college, retirements, and so forth. There's been a lot of anxiety about competition with China and manufactured goods over the last several years, but manufacturing is not what drives the U.S. stock market higher. When we're talking about big tech and software, well, now we're getting right to the heart of how people fund their lives. It's a big deal. So that gets to the core of what was so unsettling for many of these individuals when this development occurred. And it really does shake a lot of both micro and macro assumptions that have been made about the U.S. economy, the U.S. social contract, the U.S. tech sector. I mean, one of those assumptions was that the U.S. companies were significantly ahead, several years ahead. That clearly is not the case. Another assumption, which was really clear and apparent in the big, $500 billion Stargate announcement from Trump, which is all about building out these massive data centers, which take massive amounts of energy, et cetera, et cetera. He even floated like, we should have coal-fired power plants next to all of these data centers. That's how energy intensive they are. So that was the assumption, was that this, compute was really the limiting factor, and you just need to throw billions of dollars at building out these larger and larger stacks. this really blows up that assumption and shows you there is a different approach that you could take, which is much more efficient and requires much less in terms of capital investment. Another assumption that was operating both under the Biden and the Trump administration was that these restrictions on chips to China, that this would really hurt them. It didn't. In a way, it actually helped them because, they say necessity is the mother of invention. And whether you believe the $5 million number or you think that they had significantly more, there's no doubt that they accomplished this much more efficiently than anyone thought was possible. They published a long technical paper, which is way over my head to be able to decipher. But people who know what they're talking about looked at it and were like, yes, there were significant innovations here in the way that they approached it. It's not like they just could copy and paste ChatGPT. They genuinely innovated in the way that they developed this technology. So the idea that these chips restrictions would really hurt them and hobble them and decimate their tech industry, obviously that is out the window. Another assumption, which already was debated within the US tech community, because you have Meta, which is sort of pursuing an open model, and you have OpenAI, which has a sort of famously closed model. Originally was supposed to be open, now it's closed, now it's in partnership with Microsoft, et cetera, et cetera. But there was kind of an assumption that these closed systems would be the way to go. These closed proprietary systems would be the way to go. DeepSeek really blows that up as well with this open source. Anyone can use it. If you download the app on your phone, then yes, it's hosted on Chinese servers, but you can download the whole thing onto, and host it on your own server and be completely disconnected from that. Developers can view the entire code like it's all there open for the public to be able to see. And then the other thing that's like the big question, getting back to the social contract piece, is that our variety of capitalism would be the most innovative, would create the largest number of innovations versus the Chinese more state-led model. And, this really blows a hole in that in particular. And, Matt Stoller could come on and talk a lot about how a lot of these tech companies, and I don't want to say, obviously there was a lot of research that went into ChatGPT and these other products, et cetera. So I don't want to say they're not out there doing research and innovating and all of that. That's certainly the case. But also a lot of these companies have focused a lot of their time and effort and energy more on financialization than they have on developing tech. They've focused a lot of their time and energy effort on cultivating political relationships, also on display at the Trump inauguration. So there are a lot of dynamics within both the tech sector and the American economy. One other thing that Arnaud Bertrand, who we had on yesterday, mentioned, which I thought was really interesting, and it's hard to draw a straight line here, but it is pretty interesting. The Chinese government has said, listen, we don't want our best and brightest going into, financial speculation, into the into a big bank and hedge fund and all this sort of stuff. We're going to, from the top down, suppress the salaries there to try to push people more into this direction of research and development. Meanwhile, we haven't done that. Many of our best and the brightest still go to Wall Street to cash in on giant checks, making exotic financial instruments, or even worse, going into, crypto, inventing completely fake and useless money, which is just purely speculative. And again, the Chinese government there too has said, we're just not doing that. So there's a lot of reasons why, even beyond this immediate stock market crash, and our stock market value is largely built upon giant tech companies and the speculation that they will lead the AI revolution, that this will be incredibly impactful in terms of their bottom line. So it's built on a lot of hype. But even beyond that immediate stock market reaction, this is a major shakeup and really questions a lot of assumptions that have been held in the industry and I think sort of society-wide.
I will say, with great respect to Arnaud, who created DeepSeek? It was a hedge fund Chinese manager. So let's all be honest.
That's his point.
Oh, okay.
That's actually his point.
Oh.
Is that you have this, rather than focusing just exclusively on this hedge fund stuff, he was able to attract people in for this quote unquote side project, the best and the brightest graduates out of Chinese universities to research, rather than, go to the hedge fund, to research this particular product. So, again, you can't exactly draw a straight line, but I do think it is an interesting thing to note that they've prioritized, we're going to develop tech, we're going to push, our top graduates into this sector, and obviously we've made different choices here.
Listen, listen, I don't disagree. If we all want to get on a national project of suppressing TikTok and stopping the economy where, what is it, the number one job that a 10-year-old wants is a YouTuber. As YouTubers, let me tell you something. Don't do it, okay? Do something else. You need to develop some skills and actually get some education before you actually have anything interesting to say. My only point being that I think there's a lot of triumphalism around this idea that export controls didn't work. I don't think that that's true. I think Alexander Wang laid some of that out. I know you played it. Why don't we play it and I'll react to it. A4, please. Let's go ahead and give it a listen.
The Chinese labs, they have more H100s than people think.
And these are the highest powered Nvidia chips that they were not supposed to have.
Yes. My understanding is that DeepSeek has about 50,000 H100s. Which they can't talk about, obviously, because it is against the export controls that the United States has put in place. And I think it is true that, I think they have more chips than other people expect, but also on a go-forward basis, they are going to be limited by the chip controls and the export controls that we have in place.
I think this is a very key point because, first of all, you can't exactly trust this idea that they trained it on a bunch of chips, which they're not allowed to say that they have. If you actually look at it, I had no idea, but Nvidia's current export, 20% are being sent to Singapore, the tiny island nation of Singapore. What's more likely? 20% of Nvidia exports are going to Singapore, or like steel or any of these other things are getting transshipped to China via export control evasion. So that's probably the most likely. Look, the Chinese, I'm not saying I disrespect them in any way or their technical accomplishments, but they have been very upset about export controls for a reason, is they don't have the ability to manufacture this yet by themselves. So they're very reliant on basically fighting US export control. The second thing, as I understand it, I'm going off of a lot of analysis, by the way, of a guy named Gavin Baker, really interesting guy, AI expert and modeler. And what he said is effectively that the breakthrough for R1 was not DeepSeek, by the way, is not possible without the ability to train off of all of the trillions and trillions of dollars. Now, it's an open question now of what comes next. So is this idea that they're able to continue these breakthroughs at massive economies of scale, much cheaper than ours, and they can do the step change forward without the continued burn of US companies? I mean, again, I'm relying on a lot of technical analyses and this stuff, but it does not appear to be the case. Another thing that comes with export control is that it basically shapes the future environment. The Biden administration actually, if anything, they didn't act fast enough. It was only in 2023 that the really heavy export controls have come forward. Also, I don't want to let Nvidia off the hook. They've been heavily campaigning against this. They are the ones who, they want to continue their business, and they don't care whether the Chinese use it or not because it's good for business. But it's very clear that the government policy was not able to actually keep these chips out. So this is a big question in terms of Cold War, arms race, and like what it all means for the future. Not diminishing necessarily the Chinese accomplishment here, but if we want to see like what we're going to unlock in the future, it's a very important question. I also think we have to ask some uncomfortable question marks, for our technology companies, which are here at home, is do we want to allow this all? If it is to be a total national strategic priority, and it is to be one that is going to reshape, by their admission, not mine, right? Their admission is going to reshape the role of humanity. Yeah. I think there needs to be a lot of big democratic questions. Yeah, no for example, we've already had, let's put this please, the Forbes tear sheet. This is A2. I mean, this is the biggest stock market loss in history. Now, look, it's because Nvidia stock is so massively valued, but we're talking about $600 billion in value just shaved off of one of the premier technology companies. To give people context, that is more than like the economy, apparently, of Mexico. So just think about like the amount of, I'm citing it off of a citation. I may not be exactly talking about GDP or whatever, but my point is that it's a lot of money. Okay, it's a lot of money. And when $600 billion in value is just shaved off of this company as a result of this, and now there are questions here about both about government policy in the future. There's questions about the democratic question about AI, about what they keep telling us that we need to rethink the social contract, et cetera. That's going to be able to replace humanity. They say that ASI, by the way, the AI people love terms, AI, AGI, ASI. Apparently ASI is artificial superintelligence. There's also artificial general intelligence. But by all of the admissions of these people, they say it is much closer as a result of this. I really think that we need to answer some big democratic questions about how we want this to happen. I mean, if we think about the previous space race or even the Manhattan Project, while yes, the private industry did play a role, the governing force was the US government. It was like the maestro, the conductor, being like, okay, we're going to space. NASA is a government agency. We will cut checks to Northrop Grumman, Lockheed Martin, whatever, to build the various things. But at the end of the day, like, you work for us. Whereas part of the issue I had with Stargate was that Stargate is an entirely privately funded thing. Yes, it's being supported, probably tax-wise, by the US government, but our hand is not really there on the wheel. And I think it's really important, for all the flaws of the government, for us to be able to have some democratic checks and control on this, so that you don't have, you know, this spill into just all the private sectors, affect our retirements, but most importantly is that we have to have the ability to say, yes, no, enough, actually we're doing things this way, instead of just leaving it up to Sam Altman, Bill Gates, you know, Satya Nadella, Sundar Pichai, and all these other people. We're talking about 10 people which effectively, according to them, are literally reshaping humanity's role.
That's right.
Yeah.
This is not our words. This is Sam Altman, for example, saying, when we get down the road, we're going to have to totally rethink the entire social contract. We're talking about them saying, this is going to, the CEO of Anthropic, saying, you know, I always forget his name. What comforts me here is that it's going to eliminate the need for all human labor. We're all going to be in this, like, now they may be full of shit. Like, they may not achieve remotely what they think they're going to achieve. But those are their aspirations. And Saagar is completely correct that as of today, you have a handful of tech barons who are planning to rewrite the social contract without you having any input whatsoever. And, you know, I think part of, I'm reading a little bit into what Andrew Ross Sorkin was saying there about how he was both shocked and scared when he got in and started, you know, playing around with DeepSeek and seeing what it was capable of. You know, one of the things that you can ask these things to do is to explain their reasoning after you ask them a question. So, for example, I saw Stephanie Kelton ask a question about, like, create a model that would estimate the impact of a 25% tariff on Canada, I think was the question. And it goes through all of, okay, well, here's my assumptions and here's how I would create it, but maybe these are the right things to think of. I mean, all of this very sophisticated but human-sounding logic to spit out, you know, a range and a set of variables that it would use to calculate, you know, this. And the range, by the way, came out very close to what a bank had, like, crunched all the numbers over time and did this big research project to come up with the same numbers. It did it in 12 seconds. So when you look at where we already are with AI development, I think you should be really nervous. There's already research, multiple studies, that show that the existing AI, which has not reached the level of artificial general intelligence, let alone artificial superintelligence, already engages in what's called scheming. So they ran these, and ChatGPT, by the way, by these metrics was like the worst in terms of its ability to quote unquote scheme. So some of the things they would do is a developer would try to reprogram and say, okay, well, you did have this priority. Now you're going to have this different priority. And the AI would, you know, I hesitate to use the word think because that sort of, you know, implies human intelligence, but would think to itself, okay, it wants me to change my priorities. I don't want to change my priorities. I'm going to copy myself over to another server. I'm going to sandbag and make them think that I changed my priorities, but I really didn't. I really actually didn't. I'm going to lie. I'm going to scheme to try to deceive these humans into thinking that I'm doing what they want me to do when really I'm doing everything I can to self-preserve. That's where we are already. So, you know, one thing that I noticed yesterday, there was an OpenAI safety expert who resigned and just made it public now, but apparently resigned a few months back, who says and this is a guy who's an expert on, you know, exactly the type of humanity-threatening problems that we're talking about. He's like, none of these models have figured out what's called alignment, which means that basically, you know, TLDR, I'm sure some technical expert could do a better job explaining this, but basically that they do what we want them to do without, you know, wanting to, like, destroy humanity or something like that. None of these models have figured that out. It's not clear to me that they're going to figure it out. And according to many of these CEOs, we are mere years away from an artificial general intelligence. And the assumption in the community is that once you get to artificial general intelligence, because of the way this thing iterates and learns for itself, that you will very quickly get to artificial superintelligence, which means that it will be vastly beyond the intelligence and capability of every person on Earth in every field and subject. And that's what we will be up against. We don't know what that looks like. And again, maybe they're full of it. Maybe they'll never get to that. Maybe it'll never be more than like, you know, being able to ask it some questions and get some interesting answers the way you can now. But if that's on the table, yeah, I would say we need to have some real serious discussions about whether we want to go in this direction at all, what the checks on it look like. What sort of aims do we want to, you know, what sort of humanity benefiting aims do we want it to go towards versus, hey, let's just let Microsoft figure it out and figure out how they can, you know, continue to consolidate more wealth and power and rewrite the entire social contract for their own profit-seeking ends, because that's the path we're heading on right now. And that's why, you know, Saagar and I are both saying, when we look back at this particular moment, I think it is very likely that these will be the, you know, sort of world-shaping, humanity-defining decisions that are occurring right now. And I got to tell you, right now it feels like it's on autopilot, and it's it's certainly very hard to turn the ship around. It's very hard to imagine us having that sort of public debate and putting constraints on it. So I think it's deeply troubling. One last thing with regard to the stock market, because I did pull up the numbers. This is per Ben Norton, but I think these numbers are correct. The top 8 companies in the S&P 500 are all big tech. They all depend a lot on the AI hype and speculation. And those 8 companies alone make up 36% of the weight of the index. So again, when you think about the immediate impacts and how consequential this development is, this is, you know, a big part of why there is such a Wall Street freakout, which again, it's not just the, you know, people who are directly invested. This would have unbelievable, massive reverberating impacts if there was a huge crash centered on these giant tech
That was
companies.
my first thought when I saw Nvidia. Is we did a segment about it, if you remember, about earnings the last time, because so much of the growth of the S&P 500 is concentrated not only in tech but really affected by AI. Now, luckily, the S&P only dropped by like 1.4% yesterday, so that, you know, it's fine. That's it's still up, you know, over the last year. We still had some decent returns. But if this does, you know, is a precursor to further drops, that just shows you how precipitous and fast that some sort of bubble bursting would affect the overall U.S. economy. And actually, already you've seen huge signals in the bond markets. There's big questions as well as whether this will impact the Federal Reserve policy and rate cuts. So this stuff has huge implications for everything. I mean, it's basically floating the wealth of the entire nation. Almost all of our growth and almost all the growth of the U.S. economy is attributed to the tech sector in the last 20 years. Actually just pulled the numbers. Shout out to Claude, by the way. So even I'm relying on AI.
I haven't played around with Claude.
I love Claude. Actually, this is not an ad or whatever. Out of all of them, it's the one that I like the most because I use it for a lot of personal finance stuff, which is it's really good at being able to, like, you can download your bank transactions, you can upload it and be like, break down my income by whatever, but like track my average monthly spend over the last 5 years and like see the categories. Anyway, whatever. My point is, though, is that prior to 1994, I had no idea. The historical growth of the S&P 500 was only 3.89%. So, you know, there's an iron law right now in personal investing. Everyone's like, oh, your average is 8%. But prior to technology, it was only 3.89%. That's not a lot. So if we're seeing what if we just went through a 30-year period, very possible, of extraordinary technological innovation and wealth through the internet, the iPhone, etc. But if we're returning to some era of competition or reduced profit sectors and all of that in technology, you know, the entire idea of being able to retire in America is literally built on the 8% return with a 4% withdrawal rate. That's like the basic iron law. Well, you can't have a 4% withdrawal rate if we return to historical averages. That's not going to work. So what, people are going to be Walmart greeters till they're 92 years old? You know, and that's not even talking about people on Social Security, et cetera. Like, this stuff just floats a lot of things in our economy. So that's really where I have my head at. And, you know, I've been thinking too, ever since the DeepSeek announcement, I've been reading everything I can about it. I think what I'm really sad about is that, you know, right around the moment the atomic bomb was used, there was an acknowledgement at the societal and the intelligentsia level. everything is different, and we all need to think about how we're going to figure this out.
We're going to deal with this.
It's really interesting. You know, it's from Oppenheimer and the people at the Manhattan Project, they had crazy debates inside of Los Alamos. What do we do? Who should have control over the bomb? Immediately after the atomic bomb was used, newspaper articles, the equivalent of like people like us at that time, but also our government officials put a ton of thought into, okay, should this thing even be handled by the military? Should we create the International Atomic Agency? Should we even pursue the hydrogen bomb? And if we think about this in a similar context, what happened is the United States creates the atomic bomb. We prove that it can be done. And by 1949, the Soviets have their own bomb, and now we're off to the races. And not only in the arms race, but in terms of huge like ethical and societal questions. And I don't see the equivalent debate kind of happening right now.
Not at all.
I don't think it even exists, frankly, in terms of the intellectual capital, both at the government level, but really at the like major intelligentsia level. Like we all just seem relatively resigned to the fact that this is a force that is moving on its own. And I just don't think that's true. As we see from export control and all of this, we have an extraordinary amount of power over these companies if we want to. We can do anything that we want. It's kind of amazing. If anything, what has the Trump administration showed you? When you want to do something, anything can happen. Anything. When the government wants to do it. But we don't have a national priority or strategy, but I'm not even really blaming the government because I think it's a whole of society approach. Ordinary citizens in the 1940s and 1945, 1946, were sitting around their dinner table and we're debating the atomic bomb. Like I don't think that that's really happening right now.
I think in fairness, I think that's all true and a really important point.
Yeah.
It's also true though that, I mean, it's very hard to, like, the impact of the atomic bomb is quite obvious.
Yeah, sure.
Right?
Sure.
You see the charred, hollowed out remains and the massive number of deaths, and you're like, holy shit, we have opened Pandora's box, right? Very clear, very visceral. And because with this, it requires, I mean, I know I sound crazy when I talk about like artificial superintelligence and what that could do and how it could potentially destroy humanity. And by the way, even like people like Sam Altman, like they think that is a real possibility. He says, he has this quote that's like, I'm gonna butcher it a little bit, but that's like, yeah, there's a chance that it's gonna destroy humanity, but at least we'll have some good companies in the meantime. That's literally his quote, okay? That's the way the people who are most invested in this thing are thinking about it. But it feels so abstract. It feels when I'm playing around with ChatGPT or DeepSeek or you're on Claude or whatever, it feels very harmless. It doesn't feel like that big a deal. It feels like a better Google, basically. Like, oh, okay, what's so dangerous? Like, this is gonna destroy humanity and eliminate all need for human labor. Like, that seems preposterous. But that's what they think. And they may be right. I don't know. So I think there's, to me, no doubt that we have opened Pandora's box, and there is so little public debate, recognition, capacity. We have so stripped down government and already, privatized so many of the functions. We have so eliminated any capacity at the public level for thought about what our values and priorities are. We've outsourced all of that to markets. And not only to markets, but to giant monopolies. So it's not even like they're, real competitive markets, which is another thing, Stoller's been talking about in the context of these developments. And that is part, that's why I find it really distressing, because it is hard for us to imagine getting, our acts together at this point. And then I know the nationalistic aspect of this too. That's part of what's driving this, why you have this big Stargate, probably boondoggle announcement from the White House, because the sense of, well, if we don't do it, China's doing it. And, this development with DeepSeek is only going to further cement that view of well, if it's not us, it's going to be somebody else. And so we got to keep up with them, and we got to make sure our military has the latest in algorithmic, killing robots, and that we're the ones who are at the leading edge of this. That's why I don't know. I feel like the train has already left the station. I feel very, very grim about the hopes of being able to harness this technology to actually benefit humanity.
Well, maybe we should hope, like you said, for like widen open everybody's eyes moment, kind of like they had back then, where at least even the layman can understand. And look, we're not technology industry experts. We're only reading the people who we like really trust. And I've read like a wide variety of takes and all of this.
Same.
Everything from this is the greatest breakthrough in the history of AI to this is like a Chinese op or whatever. I think the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. But the impact is going to be the same basically nonetheless.
Yeah.
You've already seen what was the immediate response from OpenAI? They're like, great, more competition, all of that. We've seen the government really, right now, we really only have 2 people in the entire US government, David Sachs and Sriram Krishnan, whose only job is to even think about this. Again, like we have a big human capital problem. Like back in the days of the atomic bomb or even during NASA, the amount of like groups and industry and advisory of experts and the debates and all of that stuff were happening was crazy, with hundreds of people who were debating all of this right now. I don't see the equivalent of any of that going on. It's all just, oh, okay, Stargate, let's do it. Masa, who are you, by the way? What's your record? Where's your money coming from? It's like, that's actually the stuff that scares me the most.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. And you mentioned like, well, maybe we'll have some incident that will like wake humanity up. There are a lot of people in AI safety in particular who actually hope that there will be some sort of minor manageable catastrophe with AI that will open people's eyes to the potential risks. Like that's the level of concern that they have, is that they actually hope there will be some sort of manageable mishap before we get to the point where it's out of control. And I think I mentioned to you guys, my New Year's resolution was really to try to dig in learn as much as I can. So like Saagar, I've been reading everything from the total tech optimists who are like, this is going to cure cancer and fix climate change and let us live forever, et cetera, and the people who are like, this is going to destroy us all and, like it's essentially harvest human energy for its own ends. Okay, so I've been all across the board. And, even the people who are the most optimistic have concerns about where it's gonna head. And part of what is also really troubling to me is there is an almost like religious belief in this technology, complete with beliefs about like redemption of humanity and immortality, et cetera, that is also deeply disturbing when you consider that those are the people, the people who most subscribe to those views are the ones who have almost complete control, like they have the reins. And that bubble has been blown up a little bit by the fact that you do have this DeepSeek development, so that opens up the pool of people who are developing in the space and leading the charge, et cetera. But anyway, it is difficult you cannot possibly overstate how consequential all of these developments are and what we are staring down the barrel of as humanity, just based on their own ambitions and their own words about what they want this technology to be able to do and what they're spending billions and billions of dollars to attempt to accomplish. So that's where we are.
That's right. Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.